Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. Every day, I beg my wife to be close to me. Not once in a while. Not casually. Every single day, I lowered myself into that humiliating position, asking, hoping, waiting for a spark that never came. Her name is Lauren. We've been married 11 years. From the outside, we look like a stable couple, 2 kids, a mortgage, pictures on the wall of vacations and birthdays. But behind closed doors, the truth was colder. I was starving for intimacy, and she rationed it like she was doing me a favor. At first, I told myself it was just a phase. Stress, work, kids, life. I made excuses for her detachment because it was easier than facing the reality that my wife had no desire for me. Nights in bed became predictable. Her scrolling on her phone, me lying there staring at the ceiling, waiting for a touch that never came. When I tried to reach for her, she would shift away, sigh, and say she was tired. Sometimes she rolled to the edge of the mattress like I was a stranger invading her space. The begging became routine. I didn't even recognize myself anymore. I would compliment her, do the chores, buy flowers, cook dinner, all in the hope that maybe tonight she'd look at me the way she used to. But the look never came. Instead, she gave me that blank stare, the one that said I was a burden, not a partner. The breaking point didn't come with a fight. It came with silence. One night, after I had tried again and gotten the usual cold shoulder, I just lay there, staring into the dark. And I felt it snap inside me. Not loudly, not violently, just a quiet shift. I realized I wasn't a husband anymore. I was a beggar in my own home. The next morning, I stopped trying. No more gestures, no more compliments, no more humiliating requests. I moved through the house like a ghost, polite but detached. For the first time in years, I felt lighter, not because things were fixed, but because I finally stopped chasing something that no longer existed. Lauren noticed. At first, she seemed relieved, like my silence gave her more space to disappear into her phone and her routines. But by the end of the week, she looked at me differently, not with affection, but with suspicion. She asked if I was okay. I told her, better than you think. She didn't know it yet, but everything had already shifted. I had stopped begging, and when she finally came to me, not with affection, but with her hand out asking for money, she was about to find out just how far I had already gone. The first week after I stopped asking felt strange. The silence wasn't heavy, it was freeing. For years I had convinced myself that persistence was love, that begging for scraps of intimacy meant I was fighting for the marriage. But the truth was simple. I wasn't fighting, I was degrading myself. When I finally stopped, the air in the house shifted. Lauren noticed quickly. She asked why I was quiet, why I didn't touch her anymore. I shrugged, told her nothing was wrong. That answer unsettled her more than any argument could. Because in our marriage, silence had always come from her. Now it was mine, and she didn't know what to do with it. One evening, I came home late from work. Normally I would rush back, hoping maybe tonight would be different. But instead, I stopped at a small diner, ate alone, and enjoyed the peace of not performing for anyone. When I finally walked through the door, she was waiting in the kitchen, arms folded. She asked where I had been. I told her calmly, out. She pressed, wanting details, but I didn't give her any. Her face tightened, a flicker of something I hadn't seen in years, uncertainty. By the second week, the distance became undeniable. I went to the gym after work, something I hadn't done in years. I bought new clothes that fit better, cut my hair shorter, carried myself differently. Not for her. For me. For the man I had forgotten, while begging for affection that never came. Lauren started to shift her tactics. One night, she put on perfume before bed, something she hadn't done in months. She slid closer under the sheets, her hand brushing against mine. But I didn't respond. Not out of anger, out of clarity. The woman who once dismissed me was now trying to reel me back with the very thing she had starved me of. I rolled over, leaving her in silence. That was when it began. The questions. The suspicion. She asked if I was seeing someone else. I looked her in the eye, smiled slightly, and said, "You'll figure it out." The way her face dropped told me everything. She wasn't worried about losing me. She was worried about losing control. And then it happened. The same woman who denied me intimacy for years came to me one afternoon, her voice flat, asking for money. Not affection, not closeness, just money. That was the moment I knew. She hadn't just lost me. She had lost everything. When she asked me for money, I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, calm, steady, like her request had floated in from another world. For years I had begged her for intimacy, humiliated myself in the very house I paid for, and she had nothing but cold refusals. Now she wanted my wallet, not my touch. That irony didn't sting, it clarified. She repeated the question, a little sharper this time, like she was entitled to it. I set my coffee down, looked her in the eye, and asked, "Why should I?" Her expression cracked. She wasn't expecting resistance. She was expecting the same old me, the man who jumped when she snapped her fingers, who worked overtime to keep her comfortable while she rationed affection like I was beneath her. But that man was gone. She tried to soften her tone, said she just needed a little extra for something she was planning. I didn't ask what. I didn't care. I told her, "You have your own account. Use that." And then I walked away. No fight. No explanation. Just the end of an era. That night, she paced the kitchen, slamming cabinets a little harder than usual, her frustration leaking out in every movement. I sat in the living room, scrolling on my phone, calm, detached, watching her unravel without saying a word. She wanted me to react, to argue, to give her some sign that she still had control. I gave her nothing. By the next day, her suspicion had grown claws. She accused me of hiding something, of pulling away because of another woman. I smiled faintly and said, "Maybe I just stopped begging." That silence after those words was heavier than any accusation she could have thrown. She stood frozen, eyes wide, realizing for the first time that the dynamic had flipped. At work, I made another quiet move. I redirected more of my paycheck into a private account, closed off shared cards she used freely without ever asking how they were paid. By the end of the week, she noticed. Her subscriptions didn't renew. Her online orders stalled. She asked me about it, but I just shrugged and said, "Maybe it's time you manage your own life." For years, she had treated me like a background character in her story. But now, she was realizing she couldn't afford to lose me. Not emotionally, not financially. And I wasn't just pulling away. I was preparing for the day when I would be gone completely. She had once told herself I needed her. The truth was, she had always needed me. And now, she was starting to choke on that reality. By the fourth week, Lauren's confidence had drained away. The woman who once dismissed me with cold indifference now hovered around me like a stranger in her own home. She lingered in the doorway when I read at night, watching, waiting for me to look up. She tried to smile, tried to ask small questions, but my answers were short, clipped, deliberate. I wasn't cruel. I was distant. And that distance was killing her more than anger ever could. One Saturday morning, she dressed up like she hadn't in years. Hair done, makeup carefully applied, perfume clouding the air. She suggested we go out together, maybe dinner, maybe just a drink. Her voice cracked at the edges, as if she was begging in her own way. I told her I had other plans. That was it. Her face collapsed for a second before she forced a smile and said she understood. But I saw the truth in her eyes. She wasn't used to rejection, not from me. Later that day, she asked me again about money. This time it wasn't casual. Her voice was low, almost desperate. She said she needed help covering a few things, that her account was running low. I simply said, "You always said you were independent. Time to prove it." I left her standing in the kitchen, stunned. That night, I overheard her on the phone with her sister. She whispered that I had changed, that I was cold, that she didn't recognize me anymore. Her sister asked what she meant, and Lauren's answer was almost laughable. She said, "He used to beg for me. Now he doesn't even look at me." She didn't realize she was confessing the truth. The very thing she had starved me of was now the weapon I turned against her, and she had no defense. At work, I took another step. I met with a lawyer. Quietly, discreetly, I began the process of preparing for divorce. I didn't file yet. I wasn't ready to end it in paperwork. Not until she felt the full weight of losing me first. But I wanted the foundation in place. The safety net for me, not for her. By the end of that week, she finally broke. She sat across from me at dinner, tears in her eyes, whispering that she didn't want to lose me. She reached across the table for my hand, but I didn't move. I kept eating, calm and steady. She asked if I still loved her. I looked up, met her eyes, and said, "You'll figure that out." The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time in years, she was the one begging. And I was the one who had nothing left to give. By the fifth week, Lauren's fear was showing in every movement. She no longer scrolled her phone at night, no longer turned her back to me in bed. Instead, she lay awake beside me, tense, waiting for me to reach for her. But I didn't. I had learned the power of absence, and I wasn't going to surrender it. The kids began to sense the shift too. At breakfast, they asked why Mom seemed sad. Lauren forced a laugh, told them she was just tired, but her eyes betrayed her. She wasn't tired. She was unraveling. The woman who once claimed she stayed for the kids was now losing them too. They clung to me, asked me for help with homework, sat with me on the couch. She watched from across the room, excluded from the very family she used as her excuse. One evening, she tried again. She lit candles, cooked a full dinner, something elaborate she hadn't bothered with in years. The table was set like a holiday, wine poured before I even sat down. She smiled nervously, waiting for me to notice, to thank her, to bridge the distance. I ate quietly, complimented the food once, and then fell silent again. Her smile faded with every minute. By dessert, she was staring at her plate, fighting back tears. That night, she finally asked if I was leaving her. The question hung heavy in the dark bedroom, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned to her and said, "You'll know when it happens." Nothing more. Her breath caught in her throat, and she rolled away, but I could hear her muffled sobs against the pillow. At work the next day, I transferred the last of our joint savings into my private account. Not everything. Just enough to make her feel the ground shift beneath her feet. Enough for her to realize she had lost her safety net. That evening, she confronted me about the missing funds. Her voice shook as she asked why I was doing this. I looked at her calmly and said, "Because I'm done funding a life where I don't exist." The silence after those words was absolute. She stared at me, pale, broken, as if she didn't recognize the man in front of her anymore. And she was right. The man who begged was gone. Now she was the one begging, and I was the one who had already walked away in my mind. She just hadn't realized how far yet. By the 6th week, Lauren's pride was crumbling. The woman who once treated me like background noise now circled me nervously, as if afraid I might vanish without a sound. Every move I made carried weight because I made so few. A quiet breakfast at the table. A late return from work without explanation. Even the way I folded my clothes in silence made her watch me like she was trying to decode a language she no longer understood. One night, she tried to break through. She came into the bedroom wearing a dress she hadn't touched in years, one she used to wear on our dates when we were still in love. She stood at the doorway, waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to say something that would give her hope. I glanced up from my book, nodded once, and went back to reading. The silence between us was louder than any compliment could have been. She slipped into bed without a word, but I could feel her shaking beside me. The next morning, she tried a different tactic. She made breakfast, set the table neatly, poured me coffee without asking. It was a picture of the wife she used to be. But I ate quietly, thanked her once, and left early for work. I didn't linger. I didn't give her what she was searching for. By the time I closed the door, she was staring after me like a woman abandoned in her own home. That week, she began texting me throughout the day. At first it was casual, "Hope you're having a good day." Then it grew more desperate. "Do you still care about me?" I replied to none of them. Each unanswered message was another reminder that I was no longer hers to control. Her breaking point came on Friday. She confronted me in the living room, her voice trembling as she demanded to know if I still loved her. I looked at her with calm detachment and said, "You'll figure it out." She collapsed into the chair, covering her face with her hands, sobbing quietly. But I didn't move to comfort her. I sat across the room, steady, letting her feel the emptiness she had cultivated for years. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something important. She wasn't fighting for me anymore. She was fighting for the version of herself she had destroyed. And that battle was one she could never win. For the first time in years, I slept peacefully, knowing she finally understood. The man who begged her was gone, and he was never coming back. By the 7th week, Lauren's desperation was no longer hidden behind forced smiles or awkward gestures. It was raw, exposed, visible in the way she moved around the house like a ghost searching for a door that no longer existed. She hovered when I spoke to the kids, lingered when I packed my gym bag, tried to insert herself into moments that didn't belong to her anymore. And I let her hover. I let her watch. But I gave her nothing. One evening, I came home later than usual. The kids were already asleep, and Lauren was waiting in the living room. No makeup this time, no wine, no performance. Just her, sitting stiffly on the couch, eyes red, like she'd been crying before I arrived. She asked me if we could talk. I sat down across from her, silent, waiting. She stumbled through words about how she missed me, how she realized she'd pushed me too far, how she wanted us to fix things for the sake of the family. I listened without interrupting, without changing expression. When she finally asked what I thought, I told her calmly, "It's not about what you want anymore." Her face drained of color, her lips trembling as if she had been slapped without a hand ever touching her. She whispered that she didn't understand. I stood, picked up my keys, and said, "You'll figure it out." Then I walked out the door, leaving her in that silence. The next morning, she was different. She followed me into the kitchen, offered to make me breakfast, even tried to slide her arms around me while I poured my coffee. I stepped aside, gently but firmly, and left her standing there with her hands empty. She looked broken in that moment, like she finally understood the distance wasn't temporary. At work, I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer. The papers were nearly ready. I didn't rush the process. I wanted everything airtight before she even realized how far gone I was. It wasn't anger driving me anymore. It was precision. That night, she sat across from me at dinner, eyes swollen, pushing food around her plate. The silence was unbearable for her, but it was peace for me. Finally, she whispered that she would change, that things could go back to the way they used to be. I put my fork down, met her eyes, and said, "The way things used to be is exactly why we're here now." She didn't speak after that. She just stared at her plate, tears dripping quietly, the sound of defeat echoing louder than any fight ever could. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. She wasn't fighting for me. She was fighting against the emptiness she had built with her own hands. And I was no longer there to save her. By the 8th week, the silence in our house felt like a living thing. It followed her everywhere, pressed against her shoulders, made her flinch at the sound of my footsteps. Lauren tried everything, small touches, soft words, even awkward laughter at dinner, but none of it reached me. The woman who once rationed intimacy like a weapon was now starving for scraps, and I was the one holding them back. Except I had no intention of feeding her anymore. One evening, she cornered me in the kitchen. Her voice cracked as she said she couldn't take this distance any longer, that it was tearing her apart. She asked if I wanted to ruin everything, if I was going to throw away our family. I rinsed my glass, set it down carefully, and answered, "You already did." Then I walked past her, leaving her trembling in the hallway. The following days, she became restless. I caught her going through my jacket pockets, checking my phone when I left it on the counter. She was searching for proof of an affair, some explanation that would make her feel like the victim instead of the cause. But there was nothing to find. The truth was simpler and more brutal. I was leaving, not because of someone else, but because of her. That weekend, she tried one last performance. She suggested a family outing, something light, something to remind us of old times. I agreed for the kids' sake, but I kept my distance. I laughed with them, held their hands, took pictures. Lauren trailed behind, watching like an outsider. When she reached for me once, I shifted away casually, letting her hand hang in the air. Her face flushed, and for the rest of the day she stayed quiet, swallowed by the very isolation she had once forced on me. That night, she broke completely. She sat on the edge of the bed, tears running down her face, whispering that she would change, that she needed me, that she couldn't lose me. I listened in silence, not moving, not offering comfort. When she finally asked if I still loved her, I said, "Love doesn't beg, and I'm done begging." Her sobs filled the room, raw and painful, but I didn't waver. I lay back, closed my eyes, and let her cry herself into exhaustion. And in that moment, I understood the final truth. I wasn't punishing her. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was simply removing myself from a cage I should have walked out of years ago. She thought she could survive without giving me love. Now she was learning what it meant to live without mine. By the 9th week, the collapse was complete. Lauren no longer carried herself with pride or distance. She drifted through the house like someone half asleep, her eyes red from nights of crying, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. The woman who once told me she had no desire for me was now clinging to fragments of a marriage she had destroyed. One evening, I came home from work and found her sitting at the dining table with papers spread out, bills, receipts, notices. She looked up at me with hollow eyes and asked if I could help. There was no arrogance left in her tone, no sense of entitlement, just defeat. I stood there for a moment, watching her crumble, and finally told her she would have to figure it out herself. I wasn't going to rescue her anymore. Later that night, she followed me into the bedroom. She sat on the edge of the bed, silent for a long time, before whispering that she couldn't believe this was happening. She said she never thought I would actually pull away, that she assumed I would always be there no matter how she treated me. I didn't answer. I didn't even look at her. I simply turned off the light and let the silence answer for me. The next morning, she tried again. She placed her hand on mine at breakfast, her touch hesitant, almost trembling. For years, I had begged for that connection, begged for her to see me. Now she was the one begging in silence, hoping I would give her even a fraction of what she had withheld for so long. I pulled my hand back slowly, calmly, and continued eating. She broke down right there at the table, covering her face as the kids sat in confusion. I excused myself and left for work without a word. At the office, I met with my lawyer for the final time. The papers were ready. I only needed to deliver them. Driving home that evening, I felt no anger, no bitterness, just clarity. The man who had once begged was gone, replaced by someone who had learned the power of distance. When I walked through the door, Lauren tried to smile, tried to act like nothing was wrong. But she froze when I set the envelope on the table between us. She stared at it like it was a bomb waiting to go off, her hands trembling as she reached for it. And I told her the last thing she ever expected to hear. This isn't me leaving you. This is me finally leaving who I became with you. Her tears came instantly, but I didn't waver. The silence I left her with was louder than any final words could ever be. The night I handed Lauren the envelope, time seemed to slow. She sat at the table, staring at it as if her entire world had been reduced to a few sheets of paper. Her hands shook as she opened it, her eyes scanning the words she never thought she'd see. Divorce, division, custody, finality. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, whispering that she didn't mean for it to come to this. I stayed still, calm, detached. For years, I had begged her to see me, to choose me, to want me, and she had looked past me like I was invisible. Now she was the one begging, but it was too late. The silence I carried wasn't temporary. It was permanent. That night, I packed a bag. I didn't take much, just clothes, documents, the essentials. She followed me from room to room, pleading, her voice breaking with every word. She said she could change, that we could fix it, that we owed it to the kids. But I knew the truth. You can't rebuild something when the foundation was destroyed years ago. When I finally walked to the door, she asked one last question, if I still loved her. I turned, looked at her with steady eyes, and said, I love the woman you used to be, but she's been gone a long time. Then I left. I drove to the apartment I had prepared weeks earlier, the one she didn't know existed. It wasn't much, just a small place with bare walls and quiet air, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. The silence here wasn't suffocating. It was freedom. The calls started almost immediately. Dozens of them. Then the texts. Some filled with anger, some with regret, some with empty promises of change. I didn't answer any of them. I blocked her number, blocked her online, erased every digital trace of her access to me. For years, I had been the one chasing her shadow. Now she was the one reaching into the void, and I made sure nothing reached back. The kids adjusted faster than she expected. They laughed with me, spent weekends in my new place, filled the space with noise and life. They didn't ask why Mom cried when I dropped them off. They didn't know the full truth yet, but they felt it. They felt who had been present all along, and who hadn't. In the end, Lauren was left alone in the silence she once controlled. She thought intimacy was hers to deny, affection hers to ration, love hers to decide. But she was wrong. Love doesn't survive in starvation. And I was done begging. I didn't leave in anger. I left in strength. And the last words she ever heard from me still echo louder than any scream. I'm not the one who left. You are. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.